sia questo Sinodo un tempo abitato dallo Spirito, perché dallo Spirito abbiamo bisogno, del respiro sempre nuovo di Dio, che libera da ogni chiusura, rianima ciò che è morto, scioglie le catene, diffonde la gioia. Lo Spirito Santo è colui che ci guida dove Dio vuole e non dove ci porterebbero le nostre idee, i nostri gusti personali. Padre Congar, santa memoria, ricordava: non bisogna fare un'altra chiesa, bisogna fare una chiesa diversa. E questa è la sfida.
Thank you very much, David. It's lovely to be here with you all tonight. Thank you very much indeed for asking me to do this. I have met Colm Holmes before. I've spoken with Bishop Brendan from Limerick, but I haven't had the pleasure of Julianne and also of Sister Josephine. So delighted to meet you too. I want to start with maybe asking the panel one by one, the word synodality. You know, it's not a word that trips easily off the tongue, not one that we would be familiar with, not even I was. So maybe to start with the women first, and why not? Julianne, synodality, what does it mean for you?
Oh, now for me, Pat, I mean, very simply for me, synodality means all of us walking together. And I think that that's one of the things that I would be very much a supporter of, is the fact that all of us actually means all of us. From the very, very young to the very old, and no matter the vocation, whether it's lay, religious, ordained, whether we're married, whether we're living a single life. And I think that I've always supported the notion that if we're not all at the table together discussing whatever it is, then there's always something lacking. So with my work, I find that a lot of people say, I don't think I should be part of the process, or we feel that we haven't journeyed the perfect life to be part of different processes. But I'll always just say, well, from my perspective anyway, if you're not there, then there's something lacking from the process straight away because you've chosen not to be there. So it's very simple for me to walk with others together. And that means everyone, as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Julian. Sister Josephine, you've had experience of this. You're coming from a Nigerian perspective, and it's great to have a more global view on this. What's your understanding of synodality?
Good evening, and thank you. My understanding of synodality is simply the people of God, community, the people of God together as community in their diversity. And
when you say the people of God, so Pope Francis talks about the people of God, but he's kind of clear it doesn't always have to be people who are practicing.
I would begin with the baptized, in my understanding, because there needs to be a common ground somehow, but that doesn't exclude the non-baptized. But I would begin with the baptized. Okay, thanks, Josephine.
Colm Holmes, Colm, you're from We Are Church. Your title would give some indication of an understanding maybe of synodality for a long time. What is it for you?
Thanks, Pat. Good to be here tonight. For me, synodality is all about involving women and men in the decision-making process in our church. Our church is unfortunately split into two tiers. You have clerics and you have women and men, the laity. I hate that phrase, the laity, by the way. But that two-tier structure is holding back our church as I see it. Only the ordained can make any decisions in our church, and the ordinary women and men are excluded. So for me, synodality is a process whereby women and men will be involved in the decision-making process. And we've already seen this in other synods going on around the world, where the laity and women and men are making up more than 50% of synods and meetings around the world. And that's what I'd be looking for here in Ireland.
You hate the word laity. Do you want to tell us why, Colin?
I don't know. I prefer women and men. It's otherwise it's a bit like I don't like being referred to as sheep either. It's another term I don't like, and I know it's very common in church usage. I don't like it being used. I prefer to be called a man or a woman, and particularly women as well in our church. I think women have been very much marginalized in our church, and that would be a big issue for me. So synodality for me would be putting women right in there, and any assembly there should be 50% representation of women in any assembly that's making any decision. There's a saying in the church, what affects all should be decided by all, and that's what synodality means in a nutshell.
Yeah, I asked you that question because I think maybe this will come up later on, but the language is really important if there is going to be a coming together of people, because if we don't have a shared language, or if we are using, and the word means one thing to one person and one thing to another, then that can certainly lead to a lot of complications. Thanks, Colin. Bishop Brendan, you have had experience of synodality actually in your own diocese, and you did have a gathering, a synodal gathering. Can you tell us what your understanding is?
Yeah, well, I mean, it means journeying together. And I suppose I have this strong sense that none of us are isolated individuals. That's just by our human identity, that we actually are interacting with people all the time. And more so, that should be the life of the church, because that's who we're meant to be in God's plan. So I would see it as very much journeying together, making decisions together, discerning together, working things out together, talking things through together, supporting each other. Ultimately, the new commandment, loving one another.
The question I put to Sister Josephine, I put it to you too, Bishop Brendan, because in Vade Mecum, the document that's been released recently, in preparation for parishes for the synods, the people who put that together, the Vatican people who put that together, I mean, they do speak about this isn't just for the people who may be committed Catholics working within their parishes. I mean, it does seem like the Pope's wish is that this goes broader and wider if this is going to be something of relevance for the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed in one of his talks, he a few times mentioned the fact that we shouldn't be restricting ourselves, as he put it, to the 3 or 4% around us. And that's it's a good image that there's all kinds of people around us, but actually they're only 3 or 4% of the wider population, maybe, and that we need to be reaching out. So I feel that very strongly myself, like his point being that, on the one hand, we might, as you said, the language, we might have our own inner church questions language-wise, but there's a bigger world out there that we need to be engaging with, and other languages, other perspectives, other problems, I found myself here thinking about that in Limerick now. Who did we miss out in 2016 when we had our synod? And, immediately you can start thinking of groups, that have I reached out enough to the prisoners? What about the drug addicts? There's a whole world of people out there that would be interesting to hear. How do they see the church accompanying them today?
Well, that's really good, because it brings me to you, Sister Josephine, in Nigeria. You, like Bishop Brendan, I think, have had experience of synodal processes, because you have to start somewhere. And as Colin mentioned, there have been other places in the world where it's been underway and where synods are now involving lay people. So the idea is great, and everything that everybody said, I think most people will go, yay, absolutely. And, we're not at that place maybe years ago where we'd say, well, let the priests and the clergy decide and we'll just do it, we'll get on with it. People want to be a part, as Colin said, of what decisions that have been made about their lives. So Josephine, what experience have you had of it that might be of help to people listening tonight?
Maybe I'll begin with my own personal journey as a Catholic and as a young girl going to Mass And as soon as I was big enough to go by myself, I would run off with other girls and we arrive at the church, sometimes late, sometimes early, but we arrived as a little group. And then as a grown-up adult, I have had experience with big churches, small churches, outstations. And as a missionary, I have also worshipped in varied situations. But I was also in an area where there were more catechists than priests. Mm-hmm. And maybe we would have mass once in 3 months. And the catechist led the service. And it was not communion service, it was just service. And in one of such instances, the priest arrived late. And the elder at the door said to him, "Father, you are late, we have started." And he said, "So what do we do?" And the man said to him, "We will continue with the service." And Father had to go back. So there are situations where lay people are empowered to lead services. And then in some situations too, you have a woman as head catechist, even though she's not transferred as often as the lay catechist. And the catechists also have outstations where they minister. And then where the church is big, sometimes we have basic Christian communities where people who live in nearby areas or people who have different or similar interests or values meet regularly, not in the church, in somebody's house, and they share faith and support one another according to needs. Then we also have a parish pastoral councils where each society in the church, we have large, different types of societies. So each society in the church elects a member to be part of that parish council. So they are as effective as they are allowed to be, yes. And then sometimes too, we have a group of lay people who meet to share their reflection, like something like Lectio Divina. And then you have people who belong to Legion of Mary, Catholic Charismatic Renewal. These visit individuals in their homes. So in that sense, the church is reaching out to wider people, whether the priest is there or not. And then Nigeria is such a big country that you also have people from the same states. So like people from Cork living and working in Dublin will have a little society in the church, and they meet once a month, so that if there is a wedding, they will support their little community. If it is funeral, they will support. So that sort of brings the church nearer to the people, unlike expecting the priest to do these things.
Yeah.
It has positive aspects, and sometimes there are negative things that arise from structures that develop. But that's, I don't know if I have answered.
No, well, we might come back to that. That's interesting. But it's interesting to see, at least at that level, you know, lay people involved and in different circles and supporting one another. Julianne, have you had experience of, you know, that church you talked about, all of us?
Yeah, I think I've probably, from my own perspective, I've had a very coloured experience of being sort of just raised Catholic, and then an experience of being in the more formal structures of the Catholic Church, if that makes sense. Because I would have said that previous to my return to education, where I went back to St. Patrick's in Maynooth and then working with the Bishops' Conference and then later with Missio Ireland, I would have been just one of those regular, not so much cradle Catholic, I mean, we were practicing, but, you know, not committed to the fullest extent. And then you look at the journey was the journey. They always say, you know, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I returned to Maynooth to study law and came out with a theology degree instead and a master's in theology. And so that's just the journey. But for me, I've been I would say it's been extraordinary and an experience that's been profound for me. I've had an opportunity to be part of the World Meeting of Families, an opportunity to be part of the Eucharistic Congress. I've had opportunities to be all over the length and breadth of Ireland, working with people on parish pastoral councils, with people in youth ministry. I've worked with the Catholic Primary School Management Association. Now I'm looking after all of the primary schools in Ireland through our work with Missio. So I feel actually blessed that I've seen a side of church that perhaps a lot of people who have chosen to step away or walk away from have a perception of church that I would have had when I was much younger. And I don't want to sound patronising. It's not that I feel sorry for them in any way, shape or form. I feel sorry for the fact that the opportunity that was afforded to me to see it from a different perspective is not afforded to everybody else, if that makes sense. And I would have said that a lot of the complaints that I hear on my journeys and in the groups that I'm working with, and maybe I've just been very lucky, but for me, a lot of the discrimination that I have felt as a woman hasn't actually occurred in sort of the official structures of the church for me at all. It's actually occurred in different institutions, in different places, governmental institutions and in education settings. And I've been very, very lucky from a church point of view. So I suppose it might be naive of me to say that I'd like to see more people getting the opportunity I got. But I do believe it's possible that we can find ways to meet people where they're at and work on what we have in common rather than the things that really divide us.
Thanks, Gillian. Colm, I know we are a church and you've been working together as a group for many, many years, and you are people who are committed to their faith, but it's not that easy, I think you might say, from your perspective.
Very true. Just a little bit about myself, very little bit. My grandfather was Church of Ireland and my grandmother was a Catholic. Neither of their families wanted them to get married. They were both totally opposed to the wedding, but luckily they were in love, and they, as a result, my father arrived and I arrived. When my grandfather died very suddenly of a heart attack, the parish priest arrived in the house and told my grandmother that of course she couldn't attend the funeral of her own husband because it was going to be in the Church of Ireland. She should wait outside and not go into a Protestant church. Luckily, my grandmother and my father had the good sense to ignore the advice of their parish priest. And of course, they attended the funeral and went to that part of the graveyard as well, where Church of Ireland people were buried. That made an impression on me, although I only heard the story many, many years later. It's a church of rules and regulations that's trumping a church of compassion and love. And that gives me a great heartache to see that happening. Looking at the synodal process there's actually two synodal processes, if I'm not putting in too many S's there. There's one which the Pope has called, which is coming up in October 2023. And there's one that the bishops in Ireland have called, which is coming up in 5 years' time, the National Synodal Assembly. So there's the two different ones. For the moment, they're letting the two run in parallel. I have less hope in the one that Pope Francis has set up. Why? Because lay people, again, I'm using that word, I shouldn't be, women and men are only involved in phase one. After that, it goes to the diocesan bishop, it goes to the National Council of Bishops, the Bishops' Conference here in Ireland, then it goes to the Continental Conference of Bishops in Europe, and then it goes to a synod of the bishops of the world in Rome in October 2023. So there's 4 phases there. Only the first one, women and men are involved. And after that, it's the bishops take over all the way through. They control it all the way. That's not good as far as I can see it. There is hope, I think, in the National Synodal Assembly here in Ireland. And I would very much hope that our bishops will look at the models that have been developed in Australia, in the Amazon Synod as well, and in Germany in particular. The synodal path in Germany is an excellent example, and that's running at the moment. And I hope they have the courage to do that and to get men and women working with the clergy at a decision-making level in our church. That's so important for the future of our church.
Well, I'll just go to Bishop Brendan on that, because Bishop Brendan, like you were ahead of the posse there with your synod in Limerick a couple of years ago, and the feedback was good from that, and you had a lot of participation. What was positive about it? What were the learnings? What would you say to Colm there and his concerns?
Yeah, well, look, a word I keep repeating is learning by doing. Like, this is a whole new, not a whole new venture, but certainly it's a new energy being brought to this synodal process. At the end of the day, this has been going since Vatican II. Pope Paul launched the notion of dialogue, John Paul communion. I think Pope Francis is saying, look, we've got to drill down. We've got to really, really start into this more. And so it's a learning by doing. It might be what Colin was saying, that maybe people, and I think this is, as I understand it, the synodal process after Rome, it goes back to the diocese for further discussion. So in other words, that is written into it, but maybe that'll be part of the learning by doing as we go along. We'll say, no, we need to have more lay people, women and men involved right throughout the various phases. And maybe that'll be something that'll emerge now, even the next phase, depending on what comes back to the diocese. So that's already something that might happen during this journey. But as I say, it'll come back again even after the Rome Synod. In our own experience in Limerick, look, it was wonderful. I think the main thing for me out of it was the process of being synodal, talking together, being together. And I would have to say for all of us, it was a learning, because it's not just that we sit down like in Parliament and have a debate. We had moments of scripture, we had moments of silence, we had moments of deep listening. And there was an element of us having to practice that. And we won't always get it right, but that became the experience for me, that it was an ecclesial experience that we learned together by doing. And I would hope that's what will be coming out in this process.
Pope Francis said, and we saw it in that video there, that don't apply old solutions to new problems. So that's a really important line, I think. What do we think, first of all, the new problems, and what might the old solutions be that we want to get away from? Julianne, any ideas on the
oh gosh,
the new problems? Because there are plenty of new problems, and some of them have been new for a long time, if you know what I mean.
I know, and then I can hear my grandmother telling me there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. And so that's to hear old problems for our old solutions to new problems. I'm thinking, well, is there any such thing as a new problem? And maybe we're just having the same problems that others had centuries ago, and we just don't have that perception of it. I think problems today, for me, I think if we don't include in our conversations in some way, shape or form, are the diversity of families that exist today. I mean, I've raised a son on my own for almost 22 years now, and that's now nearly old hat. But 22 years ago, it wasn't. To be a woman that's chosen to leave a marriage and to raise a child on her own, that was a big thing at the time. Now people would say that's absolutely nothing at all in comparison to the diversity of relationships and families that exist today. So that would be one of the things for me that I think we definitely need to ensure that all the experiences of family are heard in some way. I don't think we could go through a synodal process without looking at care of the earth as another. It's not a problem. It's a huge problem, but a challenge for us to incorporate that completely into whatever processes we'll find ourselves in over the next 2 years and 5 years. I think that's hugely important. And then the other for me, that preferential option for the poor. We have our absolute understanding here in Ireland of homelessness. And again, just from a personal perspective, it is something I experienced myself when I chose to parent Daniel alone. And that has stayed with me. So it would be of major heartbreak for me to still see the statistics and the people behind those statistics that are finding themselves homeless in what we purport to be such a developed and open country. So those would be three of the new problems. As I said, they might not be new, but those would be three I would really feel we need to be looking at.
And it's interesting, and refreshing just to hear that we do have many groups and charities who look after the homeless.
Yeah.
But lovely to hear you say, doing something like that and seeing that as part of the Christian community's response as well, that it's not just, I'll give some money to the Peter McVerry Trust or Sister Stan's doing a great job, but that we as Christians are implicated in those issues in our parishes and in our society. Josephine, from your perspective, how does that speak to you? New problems and old solutions. Are you facing new problems?
Yeah, using new solutions to solve, old solutions to solve new problems doesn't make sense. I sometimes have thought of what we are facing now in the church, and I think it is an adaptive challenge that we are facing. And adaptive challenges require new experiments, new discovery, new ways of doing things involving numerous people, not just a few, not just one person solving that. And because there's no clear roadmap to follow in these adaptive challenges, we will make mistakes, we will get it right. But I think if there is openness and willingness to persevere, the danger of saying that the solution is already there, so why do we bother? Then we are back to old ways of doing things. So for me, it's about taking risks to be different, to do something, to make a little effort, even if it doesn't yield much fruit, but to keep at it.
I'm looking at you now, Colin, because again, you have highlighted, even at the beginning of your question, some of the issues for you that have been ongoing for We Are Church Ireland, the issues of the role of women. There's a term I don't like either, but the issue of women in the church. You've taken, and I know you have marched with the gay community during Gay Pride. There are issues for you. You are now a group. Do you think you're going to be welcome and fit into this synodal process? Because the truth is, you've been on the fringes all the time, shouting from outside, but really, let's say when the rubber hits the road, not really, in certain institutional way making an impact.
Yeah, very true, Pat. We Are Church has been, I'm just back actually a couple of weeks from being in Rome, and we were celebrating 25 years of We Are Church International to bring about change in our church, shared decision-making, women in all ministries, primacy of conscience, optional celibacy, a welcome for all, including LGBTQ+, those sort of things. When they were brought up originally 25 years ago, we were regarded as heretics almost. It was crazy. Today, those same items, those same goals are on the agenda in every synod in every country in the world where those things and those issues are being discussed. And in a way, you were talking about old solutions to new problems. There's old teachings as well that need to be looked at again in our church. Take one off the top of my head. The Catholic Church is teaching about LGBTQ people, that they are intrinsically disordered. That still is part of church teaching. It hasn't changed. It's in the catechism, and it's still trotted out every now and then. And we haven't got a forum within the structures of the Catholic Church where these issues can be properly discussed and debated. It's black and white. And in those days of black and white decisions, it's either right or it's wrong. Yes, there are issues that are black and white, but there's lots of other grey bits in between, and you need to have a way of resolving them. And the way to do that, in my opinion, would be to have an assembly of the people of God. I'd start here with here in Ireland, try and set up an assembly here, a mix of clergy and of women and men, and to try and tease these discussions out together and work on that. It's the teachings that need to be developed, church teachings that need to be developed. And there's no forum for it at the moment. So that's an urgent need for our church.
What would you say to that, Bishop Brendan? I mean, you're here, you're part of the hierarchy, you have the power base, that very often men and women don't feel they have. And so, 25 years, Column's group has been around, but they're not the only ones. The church knows that empty pews, people have voted in referendums. Like, they're not stupid. People are, the faithful are saying things about the problems that are there today, the new realities. There does seem to be a gap between what they are thinking, saying, voting, doing, and then what happens within the church system. Can you give hope tonight that this synodal process may be the beginning of saying, not only just welcome and we want to hear you, but you will have power too. You will make an impact and things can change.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the big revolutions that's happened in the past 100 years, we see it in the human sciences, we see it in human psychology, and in gradually also in theology in our church teaching. You know, relationships have been redeemed. We haven't always seen relationships as a place for the working of the Holy Spirit. So that's something I think which the church is growing in. And therefore, it means that as we go forward, the church as a community of relationships, a network of relationships, will become a place of, I think, understanding, discernment. That's not, however, going to happen in a day. You know, it's as if we know we are by doctrine, the body of Christ, people of God, all of that. But as if we're all connected by dark tunnels. The tunnels have to be lit up. And I think that's part of what the synodal process is doing, is trying to move us into this moment where lighting up the tunnels of our relationships we'll begin to see. Obviously, you know, there are issues. I know that there are issues and I accept that completely. But we have to also be careful. I mean, simply pinpointing a few issues and say that change that and this will all be resolved. We know from the churches, some of the things we're saying, if we change them, have happened. They have been changed. It isn't as if the problems are resolved. There's a very deep transition going on, especially in the Western world, in terms of church, faith, religion, spirituality. It's very profound. So the transition that's going on requires a very profound conversion, or whatever word you want to use, a very profound new moment. And I think the synodal pathway is opening that up. How it'll go, how long it'll take, I don't know. But I do believe it is opening it up. That I do believe.
Well, there's something that struck me. I mean, when we were introducing this, and David in his prayer, you know, talked about the Holy Spirit and, you know, the power of the Holy Spirit. And we're doing this not just as ordinary people, but as people who are trying to be guided. Josephine there mentioned catechists and people. Like, do we have the faith formation of men and women and the investment in that to allow for the nuances that will be needed in terms of listening to the Spirit and leading people in ways of listening? I think that's going to have to be, you know, something that's looked at. Julianne, you've unmiked. I think you want to come in there. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the things that you've just pinpointed there is that there's been a huge loss of faith language over the decades. So when you talk about faith formation, it's very difficult to create scenarios or parish moments or school moments of faith formation when language that was on the fingertips or tongue tips of, say, my grandparents' generation, my parents' generation, is just not there for further generations. So I think the approach has to be slightly different. I actually think we're back in a model of faith in action rather than faith in words, and for people to become for people to come to know us and to know Jesus through us by what we do rather than what we say, because the language is just not there in generations. And as Bishop Brendan was saying about Western Europe, I don't know if it's so much about just how far the others feel the church is behind at this stage as maybe just faith in general. That there's a cavity growing in Western Europe. I don't want to use the word against faith, but that a faith is being marginalized, whether it's Catholicism or whether it's a different form of Christianity or faith in other forms, in other religions. It just seems to be getting more and more marginalized because it's not what others are wanting anymore. So I think we've a long road ahead if we're talking faith formation, but I think faith in action is probably where I see us.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that, if you take Pope Francis and Laudato Si, I mean, that is a document that's been taken up by business people, big corporate companies. If we take action, and that's where many young people today are in terms of the care of our planet, care of our common home, that kind of prophetic leadership can really help in that way. Josephine, for you, just quickly there in Nigeria, you talked about the catechists, and I know in the missions, that really is something that sets them out as different when people go there, that it isn't so much the clerical church anymore. Do you have adequate faith formation there then? And is that part of what you have to engage in?
Yes, we have a couple of schools for catechists and for lay people who want to be involved in what we call evangelization. So they could have a couple of weekends for formation in specific institutes. Yeah, but again, more could be done.
Yeah. But I want to finish with Colin, but Bishop Brendan, faith formation, a key factor, isn't it, really? And it used to be there after Vatican II in the early days of the 70s and 80s, lots of it going on, not so much anymore, I think.
Well, we do have still a lot of initiatives going on, and I suppose part of the Synod will be a helpful experience of that too, because one of the things we did in Limerick, and I'm sure it'll be happening now too, with as the delegates get into place, is maybe helping people in parishes be kind of upskilled, to use that word, in terms of even listening processes of what is the Synod about. Now, that would become faith formation even in itself. The process would become faith formation. I know, like, we have people here, and I know neighbouring dioceses as well are doing certificates in pastoral leadership. These are lay people doing certificates in pastoral leadership. So they're around. But yeah, look, I'm not going to underestimate the huge challenge. Juliana's mentioned that there are, anybody under 50, it's another world, a completely different world to what any of us, we'll all pretend we're 51, any of us experienced. It's a completely different world. And that I completely accept that. And so there's an element of us beginning from scratch again, a lot. And therefore, there's an element of us having to really go back to the core of the Christian message. I accept that too. We really have to get to the core and recognize we have other teachings, and there may be problems and issues with how we say it or whatever the teachings. But the fact of the matter is we must bring that into the relationship with the core again. And people have got to hear the core in a new way. Unfortunately, a little bit in Ireland, I think, and I could be shot for things, is there's always the risk in Ireland that we immunise people. We give enough over 17 years of schooling or 14 years of schooling. We give enough for people to be immunised. And that is a huge risk for us in Ireland.
Are you afraid the vaccine's wearing off? Colin, what do you think? Or are you hopeful that this new boost can take us maybe, into a future that, we, our church, would be wanting to be part of?
Yes, I am hopeful. I do believe that the church is doing fine. It's the institution that is in a terrible, terrible state. Over the last 50 years, as we all know, the numbers of people going to church on a regular basis on Sundays has dropped from round about 90% to somewhere around about 10, 15%. It's a huge drop off. And then if you look at the vocations as well, to the male celibate priesthood, they're down into single little figures trickling along, and we're having to import priests from around the world to try and maintain a service of sacraments. I honestly don't think that change in this institution is going to come from the top, although I'm giving some of my time to work in that direction. That's why I'm going to be involved in the synodal process, and I will contribute to that. But I'm giving most of my time to being the church we want to see on the ground. So we're organising house churches, we're having faith communities where we have sharing of the word and of communion with priests who are not ordained formally as per the Catholic Church. Each of us is baptised as a priest, prophet and king. So we take that seriously in our faith, and we practice that. And we want to receive the Eucharist on an ongoing basis as food for the journey rather than reward for good behaviour. It's nourishment, and it encourages us in our journeys. So I see the change coming at grassroots level, because this isn't just happening here in Ireland. It's happening in Austria, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in France, it's happening in the Netherlands, it's happening in a lot of different countries around the world at grassroots level, where people have moved. And whereas here in Ireland, people are, say, it used to be a Catholic country, and now look at it. I think we've become a more Christian country here in Ireland, with the various referendums which were regarded as setbacks for the hierarchy. But I think we've learned what, people have informed themselves, rather than just always going to Father and asking, is this right or is this wrong? Is this black or is it white? We're thinking for ourselves. We're dealing with the hard questions and tackling them, and that's a good thing. So I have hope for the Church of the future.
Well, Colm, you've given plenty there, I think, and all of the contributors plenty there for the small breakout groups to discuss. And there is a hope, I think, in all that has been said here tonight.
And a huge thank you as well to our panel, to Josephine, Julianne, Colm and Bishop Brendan for breaking open the issues for us in a hugely insightful way, I have to say. I'm going to hand over now to Noreen Lynch, who's the director of the FCJ Centre for Spirituality, and she's going to lead us in the next part of our webinar, which is the small breakout rooms. But just before we go, I understand the panel will be here to hear the feedback, when we come to that feedback session as well. So thank you for that. So over to you, Noreen.
Thanks so much, David. I hope everybody can see me. I know on different screens I'm popping up in different corners now, but can you see me? Most people I can see in here. It's lovely to be here with you. I see a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues. And as somebody who was in Limerick Diocese for the Limerick Synod, it's just lovely to be listening to Bishop Brendan. And one of the great gifts he gave us was, he said, when we were on the steering committee, let people talk about whatever they want to talk about. And we thought we were the ones changing the world and we were going to be very radical, but we found ourselves saying things like, oh my goodness, what if we, and he said, let people talk about everything, it's grand. And so it's just lovely to be here in this conversation tonight. When you go into small groups now and listening for the Spirit and from our hearts, I'm going to ask you to reflect on what resonates with you from what you've heard. So what beats with your heart? What has helped you in some sense to understand this sense of synodality or synodal process? What has given you sense? Okay, that echoed in me. And the second thing I'd ask you, just in the silence, to notice, what would help you as a layperson to take the next step in the synodal process? So the question first we were thinking of, well, what would help lay people engage with that? What would help me? Is it something I'll need to do? Is it something I'll need the process to be about? What would help me to really be present in this? So what resonates and what will help me to step into the process? Does that make sense? So when I call your name, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and just say hello, Noreen, so that the computer knows that you want to talk. So we're going to start with group 3. Paul is there on behalf of group 3. Paul, can you unmute and say hello?
Bonsoir, Noreen. This is Belfast calling with the vote of group 3.
Perfect, Paul. Can you give us just one gem from your group? Thanks.
Okay, under the first topic of what resonated, listening was resonated on several levels, listening both to each other, but also listening to our interior monologue, and also listening to that which is challenging as well as which is comforting and familiar.
Listening, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so Angie is in group 16, if that's okay. Angie, have you any one gem that you'd like to share from your group? And then I'll go to group 6 after that to Shane. Angie.
Okay, hi Noreen. So from our group, there are 4 of us. There were 4 of us, and we have collaboration as the main kind of thing, the gem that we thought is resonate from the panel discussion, and then respect for diversity and spiritual discernment together. So those are the 3 gems.
Beautiful.
Thank you for my group. Thank you.
Lovely. Well said, Angie. Thank you for saying it so nice and so briefly. Shane in group 6 and then Sylvia in group 1. Shane in group 6.
Yes, thank you, Noreen, for that. Yeah, very diverse, but also not diverse. I think communion and of relationships, communion and relationships, about being present in the here and now, I thought was quite deep. The fact that, you know, even by meeting in a small group, that synodal process has begun. And it's that resonated with me. It doesn't have to be, you know, waiting necessarily for the church to tell us what to do, but the small group idea.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Shane. That's very helpful. Group 1 is Sylvia, and then Sally and 17 will be next. So Sylvia, have you a word?
Good evening, Noreen. Faith
Hi.
in action on the ground and listening to young people. And we have some ideas about that, how to listen.
Mighty, that's great. And that's why I'm delighted, Sylvia, that there's a survey going out tomorrow, so people will be able to share those ideas of actions on the ground. Thanks so much. Sally, number 17, followed by Oliver in group 8. Sally.
Well, the opportunity to discuss was very positive, and people appreciated that, and also the idea of learning by doing. But the one, I suppose, the main gem that people wanted to, or question that people wanted us to put forward was that what guarantee do we have that what's been said at the diocesan level is going to be taken seriously and that it will be taken forward?
Okay, so that sense of a concern or a distrust about what guarantee do we have? Okay, thanks, Sally. Oliver is in group 8 and then Jim in group 9. Oliver.
Hi, Noreen. Hi, everyone. So one of the things that emerged from our group is that, well, it's obvious that there's confusion about the word laity. Some people don't like it. Some people, I think it's a beautiful word, but a lot of people don't like it. And I think that stems from the misunderstanding really about the role of the laity, even within the church itself. You know, is it a clerical church? Is it a communion of the people of God? We have to have a definition. Also, the synodal process itself, we believe, is faith formation. So once we embark on this journey together, once we set out on this road, then we're going to learn from each other. We're going to learn the language of the process and walk together and help each other and listen and dialogue. And those are the main points from our group.
Mighty. Great. Thanks, Oliver. Thanks very much. Jim is group 9 and then Michael in group 10. Jim, are you there?
Thanks, Noreen, very much. There's so much in our first question there, a lot of things. And you could write a book on it, really. But I suppose one thing that jumped out, I just pick one strand, make our church alive by us working together, but find a language that speaks to our young people.
Find a language. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. That's great. That's great. Thanks so much. Michael Long's group 10, followed by Julie in 14.
Yeah, very good ideas coming through here as well. But just one sentence I would say is that the solution is in small groups, not in Rome.
Solution is in small groups. There's depth in that, Michael. Thanks so much for that. That's helpful. Julie.
Thanks, Noreen. Just on behalf of the 9 people in our group, what we want to speak into the room is that in regard to synodality, we need faith formation for parishioners that begins with familiar and accessible language, thereby opening up an entry route to something deeper that can be built on. And we need parish leadership to begin to speak of synodality, you know, to begin to preach about synodality, to be visibly seen to do that. And we need people to begin to experience it locally and thereby learn by doing it.
Learn by doing it. Yeah, that's great word. Thanks, Julie. That's really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Aidan Donaldson is in group 5. Aidan? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, thanks very much, Noreen. And our group is actually quite wonderful, and surprisingly, we actually stuck the task and actually agreed on everything. So I was kind of one sort of meeting I was at, that a split on it. But those are the 2 points basically were that, the faith formation should only and can only come about through witness of faith in action, and that following on Sally's group's point, the voices must be heard throughout the whole process, not just at national level. We don't want some pre-baked, microwaved version of, coming back from Rome. And somebody actually said, we don't want a repeat of the blah, blah, blah of the recent climate.
Mm-hmm. So beyond the blah, 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 into something of depth and that we were owning locally. Thanks, Aidan. I'm going to invite Tony from group 15 and then Margaret from group 13. Tony, are you there?
I am here. Gosh, yeah. There was a lot said in the group, and I hope I'm managing to do this justice. But I think the key points were that we have to build at the local level. So it's a grassroots movement. And that it has to be a genuine and a sensitive process that involves local dialogue and is inclusive. Mm-hmm. And kind of a quote: we need to speak the truth in love. Mm-hmm. And that it has to be that, like, we are the church, we are the pillars of the church, and we also have to be a welcoming church. Mm-hmm. I hope I've captured most of that. So I'll write it up anyway. Yeah.
Right, Tony, that's great. Well, we're doing it local level. That actual experiential living it is gone through, I think, from a number of groups. Thanks. Margaret, you're there in group 13. Margaret Cartwright, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I just can get the mic off. We were 6 in the group from 6 different counties, so it was quite a mixture. So point 1, to summarise that, was that everybody felt it was not. The important thing was faith formation, and not only from the academic perspective, but also through general conversation and discussion groups at the local level. And from point number 2, there was a feeling of people felt the need for invitation to talk about Synod. That I think all of us said we hadn't really heard anything about it in our parishes. And when we raised it, the parish answer is, we haven't heard from our bishops what they want. So learn by doing it. The suggestion was from somebody, create a social event in your own street to bring people together to talk about things that grab people's hearts out of the technical language of the church.
Wow. Thanks, Margaret.
And the rest I'll put onto the chat for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thanks so much. So group 2, I don't have a name, but who is gathering or listening in group 2? Can I ask? If you just unmute yourself and say hello. I'm going to look for group 2 and then group 4 and group 7. So who is group 2?
I don't know what number I was.
That's perfect. Keep going. We'll figure that out as we go.
Just going to jump in if you don't mind. The concern seemed to be expressed in our group about, first of all, how religious women were being treated by the church. And I suppose vis-a-vis the idea that clericalism, even took over what was, in marriage, for example, was mentioned, the sacrament where 2 people, and the priest is just a witness. But, it was just expressed through that concern about religious sisters, especially, and women 50-50 were being left out, and they're the ones that do the work in the church. And after the concern being expressed about that, we went on to talk about communication in the church, and a lot of people are talking about language there, and communication regarding, not to be secretive and not this need to know basis, but then it went on to talk about how did Jesus can communicate, and then we talked also regarding that and comparison with the sacrament of the Eucharist, and keeping Jesus central to it all was where we kind of finished up then by doing. People are talking a lot about doing and how to do it like Christ did it.
Yeah, what would Jesus do? That old chestnut. Yeah, that getting to the heart of it all. Yeah, thanks so much. That's really helpful. So group 2 or 4 or 7? Shall I just see who I have?
Yeah, that was group 2. So maybe group 4, there was Donal, Eiley, Rosemary, Joan, Maeve, that group.
That's me.
Hiya.
How are you? We were talking about that the church has to be relevant for where it is. And probably one of the most important points that really all been said already, but listening at a very deep level, doing things together, in small or community groups, basic kind of Christian communities, groups that enrich and strengthen one another. And then diversity of relationship and the relevance to people under 50. We noted that looking at our at the webinar this evening that most of the people would have been of a certain age and also of a certain sex. So I thought that was very relevant to what's going on, really.
Thanks, Eunice.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a lot in that. Thanks. And so group 11 and group 12. Who's group 11 or 12?
You're group 11.
Hi, Margaret. Hi. Lovely to see you.
I suppose listening came up, and a couple of things key to it. First was using plain language, even the word synodality. I mean, come on. The second thing was, how can we learn how to listen? And that, raise the difference, like that if we don't learn how to listen to each other, there's a real danger that we'll be as divisive as the Brexiteers and the non-Brexiteers. That kind of a split that's in other societies could very easily come into the church if it's not there already. Yeah. And I suppose the whole thing too of a certain, that listen, like going back to the core of the Christian message was very important in terms of what to do the next step. Going back to the core of the Christian message, and mostly for most people that felt reaching out to people whose lives are not going too well at the moment for whatever reason. And finally, there was a thing about like, find a group, go and join it. And when you're in that group, this now came from myself, when we're in it, treat it as the same famous word again, synodal process. Listen to other people, listen to what they have to say. And the key thing about listening was that your own story isn't the only story. There are other stories out there. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
Noreen, it's Karen. We're group 12.
Hi, Karen. Thanks, Margaret. Karen, lovely. Great to have you. And group 18 is going to be the last one, just to let people know. Karen.
So group 12, the heart of our conversation was around listening, but also that people wanted a genuine invitation, both at parish level, but also to other groups, that it shouldn't all centre on parish. There are other groups in the church and outside it. Where is their voice? Can they gather locally? And that there needs to be a defined process and someone receiving it nationally at the Bishops' Conference, that it's unedited when it reaches that point, that there needs to be a place for it all to be going to, so that everything is captured at the beginning. There was lots more, but that was just one nugget.
I think that's helpful. And it brings an important point that's worth naming here, because we were discussing it in our small group as well, that what is a synod or what's happening. And one of the things worth saying is that what we're doing here is saying within AMRI, there's a lay commission, which is a real gift. Not every, as David said, not every country, not every gathering of religious has a lay commission. And they have said, we want to make a submission to the synod to make sure those voices are heard. And so what's happening tonight and the conversation and the feedback that will come back tomorrow when you send back your survey is going to feed that submission, and that will go in. And I hear what you're saying, Karen, about where's the space for all the voices to come in. And I think that the broad synod has that responsibility. And one of the things that's probably worth a bit of time or worth a bit of figure at the beginning is, what is a synod as opposed to an assembly, as opposed to a listening process? So that faith development, for two reasons. One, so that we're clear, because the clearer we are, the more we know whether we want to get involved and how we'll get involved. And the other is so that people don't pour their heart into something and say, but I thought this meant. So I think having that space to be able to give the unedited feedback, to really say where we are, but being very clear on what we're feeding into each time will help. And that's been said by a number of people. I have to say that's probably the fastest feedback I've ever got from groups. I obviously terrified the facilitators because everybody was just bang on. What each facilitator or note taker is going to do is to send back in their notes tomorrow. But each individual here will also get an email where you can send in and you can say, look, actually something that I'm not sure will come through, but I'd like to say is this. And that will all feed into the AMRI Lay Commission. We'll be looking at making that submission. We're not quite finished yet. What I'd like to do now, because we have a couple of minutes, we've only 3 or 4, is give people an opportunity, if they'd like to speak just as briefly but to name a couple of points. Is that
Noreen, there are 2 groups just left. There's group 7 and group 18. There's just 2.
I apologise. I thought I had them all heard.
Group 7 here.
Sorry, excuse me. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, we were very disorganized, number 1 and number 2 and number 3. And basically, and somebody has said it, the power is in the small group, but the difficulty is finding a small group. And if you are already interested, you need to go at it yourself. That's how it's. So how you do it, if there is a small group in your parish, somebody has said it, away you go. Look at them. And the basic point was made really by that one person that somebody should be in charge. Now, as you know, it's not happening in the parishes and it's not happening in the diocese. So you better do it yourself.
Okay, Jared. Better be about it ourselves. And the last group, Helena, is it 18?
Okay, I'm speaking for group 18.
Darn it, yes. Thank you so much. Apologies for leaving you last.
No. I think the quotation at the beginning from Eve Congar, we don't want another church, but we want a different church. And the difference that we mentioned again and again was that everybody takes part. Jesus excluded nobody. Everybody should be invited. And those who come should be heard. We came at it the other way, is that people need to know they will be heard. And so invitation to everybody, and in particular to young people. We had a concern for young people to be involved in the process.
Excellent. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to say briefly, if people want to add just a few more comments, there's a little helpful button at the bottom that says reactions. It's down at the bottom of your page. And if you have a reaction button, you can put a little yellow hands up and that'll bring you up where we can see you. If you want to put something in the chat room, if you say, I'd really like to say something, I don't want to speak, just do that. But I'm just going to gather a couple of the voices. We'll finish. I'll finish in less than 5 minutes. So, Hodrigeen, it'd be lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, can I just say something that I didn't say in my group, but my involvement in Irish Celtic spirituality for years, and I just say that I feel it's actually listening to everybody. It's back to the future in the sense of we have a fantastic inheritance in our tradition of models of small communities all over the country. We've the remains of all those monastic ruins, and that was our heyday. And we produced a fabulous amount of scriptures, scholarship, learning, craft work, and all of that is there. The small thing and the feudal model of church, which is what we have today, is not working, and it is not the future. I think it's back to the future that we're talking about here, and we have such riches in this country. Can I also add something in? There was a lovely lady in our group called Samara, who's from a persecuted church in Pakistan, and I would like to say to her on behalf of the Irish people that we also know what it is to be persecuted. We had penal times, and we've had a certain persecution in the last time as well, in more recent times, and we do walk with the persecuted people as well.
Thanks,
I just wanted to hear that. Yeah,
from the edge of the burn, where a lot of beautiful places are. Yeah. Regina, you're the next voice up that I can see there. Thanks so much, Patrick.
I would just like to add that it was also said in our group that the invitation would need to be personal.
Personal. I think that's so true. Yeah. Personal invitation is at the heart of it. So there's just a couple of more voices. So Patricia, I see you there, Patricia Fitzsimons.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I've been attending a lot of synodal Zooms from We Are Church and Association of Catholics in Ireland and here, and I'm very impressed by the amount of bishops who are getting involved in the listening process. I think there's been 7 or 8 of 24. So I think, it does sound like maybe, we're not involved in the later process, but I think as long as they're listening now, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's helpful. My hope from tonight is not that you would go home with answers, because we are part of a synodal process. And the point is to stir the waters. My hope is that you're gone home with questions rather than answers, because the more questions we have, the more we're saying, Lord, I never thought how we'd include people in prisons. It never struck me that we should have some conversation about the wider church, about those who live in other countries. I never thought in terms of how a synod actually is different to a citizens' assembly. if you're going home with questions, if you're going home saying, God, we used to have faith communities and basic Christian communities years ago, could you even do that now if you wanted to? That's the beginning of the synod. We're in the process. So I'm not saying everybody has to work from here and do something, but I'm saying if in your heart you can take a breath now and say, I'm going home with a thought or a question that's helpful to me in this process, and that maybe I might think about one or two people I could talk to about this. I could say that I was here tonight, or they were here as well, and we could talk about it. I think that's how the synodal process will continue. So I'm going to hand back to David, and thank you all so much. I want to say a huge particular thanks to the facilitators who jumped in and were absolutely wonderful, especially those who weren't actually asked and who just found themselves with that role. Thanks so much. It was an absolute pleasure. Take care of yourselves.
It just falls to me to say a big, huge thank you to each and every one of you on behalf of AMRI. We're honoured by your presence. Noreen used the phrase fizzing. My brain is fizzing at the richness of the feedback, and I can feel it going in all sorts of directions, you know. And I think one of the standout things for me is that the synod is already underway. We're already on that path after tonight, you know. I think that's hugely rich. So just to wish you safe home, and just a short prayer, maybe we could pray together. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.